Hi everyone. I think we are live. Okay. Um okay, let's see if anyone is here, if you could type into the chat just so I know you can see me. I'm on my iPad here to see if it's showing up on my end. I'm not seeing it yet. Okay, I think we're good. Cool. Okay. So I'm gonna probably just wait like another couple minutes to see if anyone shows up, and otherwise I think I'm just gonna get started, and hopefully whoever can't be here during the live can watch this on the replay. I'm just gonna check the hello. Okay. Okay. So I put a vote on Instagram to see if you guys wanted to do a portrait or landscape today, and it was kind of half and half most of the time, but the portrait ended up winning. So we are going to paint a portrait. Hopefully, some of you will paint with me. We're using this reference by Camilo, and I love his references. He puts these references in the Canyo reference chat that I get a lot of my references from, and he very kindly is allowing me to use this today and post the reference here for you guys. So whoever wants to paint along can paint. I did my sketch of the photo last night. So drawing is definitely my, I'd say, main thing that I want to work on as an artist. I feel like my drawing skills need still a lot of work. So what I've been doing lately is freehand drawing, especially for portraits, freehand drawing, and then once I'm done with the freehand part, I will project the image onto my drawing to make sure that the proportions are correct and just see kind of like where I'm off. So it's nice to kind of check my progress with this because for a while when I would do that, my proportions would just be like totally off, and I was like, oh, I was like nowhere near where I was supposed to be. And lately, they've been getting closer and closer. So I don't know. You can see kind of the phantom. Excuse me. You can see the phantom of my freehand drawing. I try to do my freehand drawing with a regular pencil, and then I do my over drawing on top of that when I project it on. Usually try to do that with a different color just so I can see, where I needed to work, like what placement wasn't working. So this one was kind of cool to see because when I was done with the freehand drawing, it felt like it didn't look like Camilo at all, and I was like, oh, I lost his likeness. I didn't get it. And then when I projected the image onto my drawing, it actually was really close. I mean, the biggest thing I think was that I was just making his head a little bit too tall. So yeah, so that was kind of nice to see. And I think let's just get started. I've just started doing these live, so I'm not totally sure how busy they'll be, but I think just painting live and hanging out here with you, even if people are just kind of hopping in and out, is totally fine with me. So I wanted to use these new gouache paints that I got. They're by Talens, and I've been trying to get my hands on these gouache for I don't know, over a year. And I could not find them anywhere in the States. Like every time I found a store that sold them, they were all in Europe, and nobody that I found was willing to ship to the States. So I was kind of just getting, disheartened. I might be in Europe this fall, so I thought I was going to have to just wait till I was in Europe to be able to get my hands on them. And then I found through another Kenyo member, actually, he suggested that I look at this place called Arte Miranda, and they're just like a big art supply store in Spain, and they were able to ship it to me. I spoke about this last session, and it was a very nice surprise to see that they actually came in the glass jars, which is what I was hoping for. So they do say tempera, so I'm a little unsure. They're definitely gouache, but I'm confused about this the tempera name on the bottle. I'm taking a workshop right now with Haney Sultani, I think is how you say her last name. And she, I believe, uses these gouache, but she says that hers don't say tempera on them. So we're going to clarify that, I think, in the next class. But for now, this is what we're going to be working with. I'm going to pretty much, I try to use a limited palette when I'm doing portraits. When I'm using my regular Winsor & Newton portraits, I will stick to ivory black, yellow ochre, cad red, and white. But these gouache actually don't get made in cad red, which I was surprised by. So I do have vermilion, which is actually what the Zorn palette originally had in it, but it's pretty orange. So I've done a couple Zorn palette portraits with these, and I think just because I'm used to using cad red, it just it's not giving me those pinks that I really am accustomed to getting with the cad red. So we'll see how that goes. I did pull some greens here. So fur green, and then this one is just regular green is what they call it. Just because I love how bright Camilo's hoodie is. So typically, if I was just going to stick to the Zorn palette for this, I would use the ivory black and the yellow ochre to get my green. But I wanted some part of the painting to really pop, and I feel like the hoodie around his face would be a good place to put that. So I'm going to experiment with these two and see which one works best. I'm assuming it's going to be this one that I use. And then I do think that I might get one of the other reds just to see if I can get closer to some of those pinks that I love. So we're not going to really use the Zorn palette. We're going to be using whatever. I'll tell you all the colors that we end up using. Okay, so we've got, let's see, so we've got white, yellow ochre, vermilion, scarlet red, which actually looks the closest to me like cad red, but it's definitely more pink. So I've got the scarlet red, some burnt sienna, and then their neutral black, which acts a lot like ivory black. So let's see, I think I do like to do underpaintings in that opera pink that I love that I did the underpainting with last time. but I think I'm not going to do that because these Talens Gouache don't make a really vibrant pink like that. And I want to try to do the entire portrait in these paints. So I think I'm going to do the underpainting in this burnt sienna. So let's see. So I'm going to just put this paper towel on the other side here. So typically for my underpaintings, for portraits, I try to stay as loose as possible. I've recently kind of developed a new technique for portrait painting with gouache that has been working really well, which is I start super transparent, really loose at the start, and then I go in with very small brushes to kind of get my value and like color shifts. And that's been going really well. So typically what I'm doing for, sorry, hold on 1 second. I'm going to pull this up here. Okay, where was I? So I'm going to do the underpainting today in this burnt sienna, and the Talens burnt sienna is quite different than my Winsor Newton burnt sienna. Winsor Newton burnt sienna is way more orange. This reads a lot redder to me, which is cool. It's still a really pretty color, but just a heads up. So I'm going to try to just get some of the darker sections. And I like to keep this part transparent also because I can still see my marks that I make underneath. And the only spot really that I want to avoid touching with paint at this point are any spots that are the lightest value. So with gouache you can layer, but I found that you can maintain that kind of glowy light value better when you're not layering like a bunch of paint over it. And if anyone is here, feel free to say hi in the chat. Tell me where you're watching from, if you're painting with me today. Okay. So I think I'm going to go in with a little bit of yellow ochre now just to warm it up some more. And kind of indicate some of the mid-tones. So there's quite a bit of light on his face, so I am going to keep the majority of this pretty bare. Although, because it's so much in light, I do want to bring in a lot of warmth underneath his skin. And gouache, in my experience, has a tendency to get really cool, and I think it's because you have to use quite a bit of white when you're painting with gouache, and white has a tendency to cool colors down. So I might just throw in a little bit, just like a really thin wash of some yellow ochre just to warm these areas up before we go in with a light value. Okay. And then while I've got this pool here, I've been really enjoying doing these kind of paint splatters, especially in this underpainting area, because a lot of it gets covered up, but the little bits of it that peek through at the end of the painting, I just feel like they create like a kind of cool effect. And this is just a big round brush, and I'm just kind of pulling the bristles back toward me and then letting them go. I also feel like sometimes this creates some cool texture on the skin, kind of like indicates like, you know, maybe some like freckles or things like that. Gives you like a few little spots. Okay, so at this point it's pretty wet. I'm just gonna blot some of the really wet spots, and then I have a little kind of heat gun hair dryer thing, and I like to dry this down before I go in to do any other layers. So I might mute you guys while I do this so that this doesn't like blow out your eardrums. It's not too loud, but it might pick up really loud on this microphone. Okay. So I'm gonna wipe some of this up because I don't want my more opaque layers to get too transparent. And you don't have to keep your palette this clean. I'm kind of like a weirdo about cleaning my palette. But I find when I work on a dirty palette, I actually get some really nice neutral colors. So, okay, let's see. I think I'm going to go in and try to get some of these darks to begin with. So usually, especially once I get like a bigger or a smaller brush, I'll typically try to zoom in on spots of the reference that I want to focus on and kind of work in that area for a little while, move on to another area. I don't tend to like finish an area completely before I move on to another area, but I do like to focus in on certain spots to start. So I'm probably going to get some of these darker colors in with a, you know, small to medium sized brush to start with. And then the further along I get into the portrait, the smaller the brush will get. So let's see, which one do I want to start with? Okay. So I usually keep a small bowl of clean water on my palette here when I'm painting portraits, because sometimes when you're using a small brush like this, It just needs like a teensy little dab of water to just be able to move the paint a little bit better. So I don't want to get carried away and dip it all the way into my water bowl, because oftentimes I found my brush gets like just too wet. So, and it's easier to maintain like a really light touch when the bowl is small like this, I found. So for these darks, I'm using some burnt sienna and some ivory black to get like a really nice dark value. Like I said, this burnt sienna is a bit redder than the Winsor & Newton, so I feel like when I mix it with the neutral black of this paint, it almost creates like a really dark reddish purple, which I think is pretty. So I'm just going to squint and try to find the spots that have the darkest value. And I think it's going to be kind of this area of Camilo's face. So there's some like distinct color variation on this side of his face that's in shadow. Some of it is reading really warm to me, and then there's quite a bit like on his skin tone that looks really blue. So because I'm just using this black as my blue on the palette, we're not going to be able to get like a ton of, vibrant blues here, but if you lighten up an ivory black with some white, you can usually get a nice blue, like neutral blue tone, especially if you pair it with something warm like orange or, orangey yellow, which I'll be doing when I get into this section of his cheek. The bristles on that brush are kind of rough, which is nice for texture, but I kind of want to keep this a little smoother still. So I'm going to switch to this longer. This brush has a little bit softer bristles. So I'm trying to stay conscious of creating this dark value here, but remembering that I'm going to have to make the section of his hoodie that's in shadow here. When I squint, it's actually a bit darker than his skin. So I want to make sure that there's enough room in these strokes here so that I can go darker in this section, if that makes sense. So just trying to warm this gray up a bit for this section here. And just seeing where I can carry some of these piles of color that I've created anywhere else in the painting. So just looking at this underside of his nose. Again, want to make sure that I don't go too dark on his actual nose here, because it looks like the shadow underneath his nose is darker. So I want to make sure that I've got room to go darker in the value. Looks like it gets a little more red over here. Okay, I think I'm going to try to just jump into using a smaller brush now. Try to get some of these subtle shifts. I love these small brushes, but they definitely get ruined pretty quickly. So I'm going to try to stick to sizes pretty small. This is a 5-0 here, which a 5-0 round. So as you can see, the bristles have gotten really splayed out, which is uncommon when it comes to gouache. One of the reasons I love gouache is because it's so easy to keep your brushes nice. But I've noticed since I've started using these smaller brushes that they get pretty beat up pretty quickly, which is okay. It just means you have to get new ones a little more often. I also use a brush shaping fluid that will kind of stiffen them when you're not, you can let them sit in that while you're, like at night when you're sleeping or whatever, and it just helps keep the shape. And then when you're using brushes that are this small, I really find that I use this bowl of water on the palette a lot more because they just lose their fluid so much faster. Okay, so let's start with, I think let's start with this eye here. I love these shadow shapes on the eye. I'm going to try to bring out the underdrawing a bit more so I can kind of see what I'm working with. And then typically when I'm working on like one section like this, I'll zoom into my reference really close especially if I'm working with a small brush like this, because there's such subtle value shifts, and I just think they're easier to see when you zoom really close in. Like there's definitely a little cool shape in this corner of his eye socket that's darker than anywhere else. So I really love this this bit of light on his upper eyelid here. So I'm just gonna kind of draw that in to make sure that I don't miss that shape. And I have all my colors kind of lined up right here in front of my painting, because with these jars it's a little bit harder to gauge how much paint I'm getting because you have to kind of dip further in. But I can tell you what colors I'm using if that's helpful. So some of these bristles are starting to come apart, which I just noticed with these smaller brushes, I have to make sure that when I'm dipping into the paint that I kind of do a little turning as I do it to make sure that those bristles don't splay, because they can kind of mess up your brush strokes. There's like so many pretty colors in this shadow, and this like one little shadow on his eye. Um, it's like purpley, and then the outline of it has these really pretty subtle like reddish tones. So I'm gonna try to capture those. Okay, so that looks a little too light to me, but I think I'm gonna let it sit for a little while because I think it might darken up. So I feel like when I started doing these small brushed portraits, it felt like this is a really good way to paint portraits with gouache because um, I've been trying to kind of figure out my groove with gouache portraits for a while that don't, I don't know, there's this style of gouache portraits that's cool, but it wasn't quite what I was going for. Um, I wanted to be able to have, I mean, I think I just love, so many of my favorite painters are oil painters, which I've said before. And I feel like, oil I just think is, the best, probably the best medium to do portraits in because of how much blending you can achieve with it. Um, but I've been trying to figure out a way to work with gouache to, you know, get something similar. I mean, I know it's never going to blend exactly how oil does, but I wanted a way to use it where I was taking advantage of the quality that it has, that it can be reactivated with water. And um, I, felt like I got to a decent place with it, but it still wasn't quite what I was envisioning. And I think it was just because I was using brushes that were quite large, and I think it was just too hard to control the subtle value shifts with them. And when I started using a smaller brush, I was like, oh, this feels really cool to do with gouache because you can get some of that blending with the small brush without affecting like really large areas. So that felt like a really cool shift in the way that I started painting. Like here, like this section definitely gets lighter as it gets closer to the light here, but I don't want to mess with this darker corner here. So typically what you can do is get your brush, wet but not too wet, and then just kind of push some of this color around so that it blends. I don't know if you can see that there. Yeah, I just love that. I think that's so cool. So I want to make sure that I get, there's one section here that's really dark. So just trying to find that value of this shadow shape. It's reading pretty purple to me. Let's see. Now I'm going to try to lead it into this shadow that's kind of going up the side of his head here. They kind of lead into each other, although it does get lighter here. And a little more blue. And I may have made that shadow come over a little bit too far to the right, so I can bring that back in when I kind of highlight that light spot on his eye. So the shadow shape here is it's a bit angular, which I'm not crazy about, so I think I'm not gonna copy that completely. I might just soften those angles out a little bit. Okay, I'm gonna go in with some of the scarlet red. Like, I don't know if you can tell here. In the bottle, it looks more cad red to me, but then when I put it on the palette or on the brush, it definitely reads more like alizarin to me. And I'm just gonna try to get this dark red kind of shadow shape on his ear. Okay. I think I'm gonna move on to, let's do the nose. I'm gonna try to keep the light values for later. I'm just gonna try to get some of these color variations in the shadow sections first. And actually I'm gonna go back in here and just lighten or darken some of this section up a bit more. And this is with mostly the burnt sienna. Trying to just blend that big black dark out a little bit. I feel like I always get a little bit too dark around the eyes, and I've noticed that that's usually when I kind of stop liking the eyes, when they get too dark. So I'm trying to just stay cautious of that. And I'm going to actually put in some of this darker gray. Okay, let's move on to the nose. Okay. So again, I want to make this underside of his nose quite dark, but I want to make sure that there's room to go darker for this shadow shape underneath. And then it gets quite red the closer we get to this right side of his face. So there's some like kind of cool luminosity in this bottom section here, and I'm not totally sure how I'm going to get that yet, but I want to remember that because I think that might just be even making a really small mark with like a pinked white or a, you know, a kind of reddish um, light value right underneath here. And if you're just hopping on, feel free to say hi in the chat. Just kind of hanging out. Let's see. I'm not going to get into the whole body of his nose quite yet because that's a much lighter value. I might do just a touch of this light purple here though. Okay, let's get this shadow underneath his nose. So it looks like it's darkest right around this crease here. So in there it looks like a really dark red, and then it kind of lightens out toward purple as we get out closer to out of the shadow. So I'm going to just kind of place those subtle transitions in, and then I'll blend them with that like damp brush technique that I was just talking about. So on the outer edge of the shadow shape here, it's very red. I love that. There's always this like line of really red, like red color right at the outer shape of shadows a lot of times, especially when you're in bright sun. Okay, and then this little spot underneath this nostril is a lot warmer. So I'm mostly just doing this pal here, which I think was burnt sienna mostly. A little bit of scarlet. Okay. So now I'm going to take this brush and just kind of blend these transitions out. Cool. Okay. Let's go to this eye. So I'm comparing this shadow to this shadow. This shadow on this side is much darker and I'd say a bit cooler. This one's going to be quite a bit warmer and definitely lighter, but still very much a shadow. So we want to find that right color. So I want to just be cautious to not make his eye too big. I feel like that's a really common thing that I do. I tend to make eyes way too big. So just trying to rely on this under drawing. Oh, no worries, Holly. Did I do that wrong? What did I say? 11 Colorado time. So that would have been, what, 10 your time, I think. You're in Washington, right? So just getting Camilo's shadow shapes in right now. Um, Worked on his eye, his nose, and then working on his other eye now. Oh, weird. It doesn't automatically change it for you? That's silly. Well, thanks for showing up. I've just been kind of painting in silence, which is what I normally do, so it's not too bad. Holly, are you going to paint Camilo today? Cool. He's got such a good face, I think. I've painted him a few times. I don't know him personally, but he always posts these really like stern looking faces, but he seems like a very sweet person, which I relate to because I think I have like a kind of stern look about me, but um, I think I'm pretty warm when you get to know me. Oh, yes. Totally understand that dilemma. Trying to paint with kids around. Okay. I think I might do a little more warmth underneath here, but then I'm trying to kind of just get all his shadow shapes in first, and then go back in and get some of the lighter values. Let's see. I'm going to go to his mouth. Try to get some of this. There's some really cool shadows on his mouth that are, I think they're going to be kind of tricky. Let's see. So I just finished this book a couple days ago called Atomic Habits. Have you read that book? It was pretty fascinating, and um, I'm trying to apply some of the techniques that the author suggests, and so far they feel very counterintuitive, but I'm curious to see if they help make a difference on some stuff. The author's name is James Clear, and yeah, he just like talks a lot about brain chemistry and like how to sustainably build habits. And a couple of the ideas that I resonated with were the idea of like habit stacking, he calls it. So you find a habit that you already have that you are consistent with, because everybody has something that is a habit, you know, in their life, and you try to kind of hitch on to that habit. So one of the things that I'm always trying to be really consistent about is taking vitamins. Especially, I had COVID last year in January pretty bad, and I am convinced that I have some kind of long COVID because my fatigue since having COVID, like over a year ago at this point, is so out of this world. Like, you know, I mean, I'm a mom to two pretty high need kids, and I have a busy life, so I'm always tired, you know, like that's not, and I don't sleep enough because I like to stay up late and paint and stuff, but so the idea of being tired is something that I've had for a very long time, but this is different. It felt like I was never a napper or, um, you know, like I slept at night and that was it. And it's to the point now where like if I lay my body down or sit still for, you know, more than 5-10 minutes, kind of anywhere in the middle of the day, I will just fall asleep. And it's scary because I have like, you know, shit to do and like pickups and stuff. And I had a few times and I was just like, oh my God, I fell asleep. And I would like wake up, you know, thank God, like in time to go pick up my kids from the bus or from school or something. And But just, when you wake up and you're kind of like in a panic because you're like, oh my God, I didn't mean to fall asleep. It's like that level of fatigue. Like I've never experienced that in my life. And so for me, the only thing that seems to combat it, and it still doesn't make it like totally go away or anything, but if I take vitamin D, it really helps. And I'm just horrible at remembering to take it. So I started implementing some of his ideas for how to build new habits. And um, so this week I've tried to piggyback on my habit of making coffee every morning. And my husband and I use an AeroPress to make coffee, and we let it brew for 60 seconds. So I was like, okay, I have 60 seconds every morning where I'm just like standing there waiting for the coffee. I should just stack the vitamin habit onto that 60 seconds so that I remember to take it. And so far, so good. This week I haven't missed a day, which has been nice. So this area lightened up quite a bit here, so I'm just going to darken that shape in the very corner there that I liked. Okay. So far, so good. I'm liking these shadow shapes. We'll see how it goes when we get to his beard and mustache. Beards and mustaches are always tricky because you want to kind of have to decide like how much texture you want to give them. I take cholesterol meds when I make my coffee. Batching habits like that is helpful. Yeah, for sure. I know. I always get worried about like, oh my gosh, what if, I got actually like sick and I needed to take medication every day, or when I get older, if I need to take medication every day. I've always been really worried that I would not do well with that because I'm not great at habits like that. So I am hopeful that some of these ideas that he has in this book will help me figure out a system that works, because there's just some things I've always wanted to try to figure out how to sustain in my life, like, like drinking more water and, having like a really consistent like movement practice. And so yeah, we'll see. I'm like, why can't everything just feel like sitting down to paint? Because I sit down to paint every day without even like thinking about it. I'm just like, yeah, this is what I do. Like, I'd rather do this than anything else. Okay, so before I move on to some of the more mid-tones and lighter values, I'm just gonna look around and see what I think might need some touching up. Okay, it's starting to look like Camilo. We're getting there. I might put in some kind of place markers for his beard and mustache here before I move on to to the lighter tones. So I'm still in the phase of drawing people where I say, this is definitely a person. This does not look like a tree or a crab. Good job. I totally hear you. I kind of went through my underdrawing at the beginning of the live, but I was saying how my main focus, especially since I've finished the the 100 mini project, is I really want to work on my drawing. I feel like it's a real weak point in my art practice. So one of the ways that I have started doing that with portraits, because I really love, like, I found that I was just like wanting to skip the drawing part completely and just jump into the painting because I just love the painting process so much. And I was like, okay, I don't want to just like trace or project like every painting I do. Like, I was okay doing that, here and there, if I wanted to really just focus on mixing colors or brush strokes. I didn't want to have to spend like hours trying to get the drawing correct. But I was like, okay, this can't become like a crutch for you. So what I started doing, and this might be helpful for you, Holly, is I started freehand drawing. And this, I think this works good for portraits specifically. I started freehand drawing the portrait. And then once I felt like, okay, this is kind of, the as far as I can take it right now without spending like hours and hours and hours like proportion checking and everything, I would project the image over my drawing and then correct it that way. So, and for a long time when I would do that, it was just like way off. Like, I'd be like, oh, I just put his eye like an inch too far to the left or whatever. And now I've gotten to the point where like it's almost correct. Like, but portraits are so tricky because if one little thing is just slightly off, it can just throw the whole likeness off. Which has been really cool to see because I'm like, oh my gosh, everything I drew was technically correct as far as proportions and placement, but his nose was, 2 centimeters too low, or his head, like in this case, I drew the top of his head like a bit too high. This is like the line for the drawing I did. Or like his ear, I made a little bit too big. Things like that. And you wouldn't think something so small would throw off the entire likeness of a human being, but it totally does. So yeah, that's something to think about. But I like this process because it's helping me, practice my drawing and making sure that I'm not skipping that step, but then still having the opportunity to correct my mistakes before I go in with color. So I use an app, Holly. It's called, let me see what it's called. I think it's called DVE. Let me check. Is that it? Yeah, DVE. It's called DaVinci Eye. And it's so cool. It's really nice to have on your phone. And you can just, prop your phone like on something like this, like some kind of holder, and put it over your page and then get the shape that you want. And you can like mess around with the transparency, and you can like move the image so you can get it really placed correctly on your drawing. So for me, like when I'm correcting my drawings or checking my proportions, I'll move the image so that, at least one of the eyes is where I drew the eye, and then correct it from there, if that makes sense. Yeah, you should give that a shot. See if it helps you at all. Yeah, for sure. I know. It's like such a nice, I don't even know how I found it. I don't remember how I found it. Maybe it was like an Instagram ad or something. But it's very convenient. They also have like a new version that I haven't tried yet. It's like a mural version. So I think you need an iPad and a phone to do it, but you can project, like a smaller image from your phone and iPad onto like a huge wall if you wanted to. And you can kind of like draw your shapes in sections like that, which is cool. But like I said, my goal this year, especially, I really, really want to work on my drawing. So I usually have a sketchbook with me. Like I have this sketchbook, which is like my head study book, which typically just stays in my studio. And then I always have a sketchbook with me that I like leave in the car or leave in my purse. And I try to just draw and paint in that as much as possible. So I really want to get a lot better at drawing, which I think you can really only do by actually drawing more. And it's so tempting to skip that step because, I don't know, for me anyway, I just feel like I get so excited to like whip out my paints. But I really love drawing, and I love like artists who only draw. Like Camilo, actually, the model here, he draws. I think he might paint as well, but mostly the work that he shares on his online platforms is mostly drawing. And I just feel like it's such a cool medium. Like I follow a few people who draw like how people paint, like the subtlety that they can get with pencil is just like so cool. I think I'm gonna bring out one of these greens. So I wanna, Holly, I'm using my new gouache, and I'm using white, ochre, vermilion, burnt sienna, and then a neutral black, like an ivory black. And then I also added in a scarlet red because this brand doesn't make a cad red, and I've gotten pretty used to painting with cad red. But since they don't have it, I'm finding that if I mix the vermilion with the scarlet, it creates a nice, close to cad red color. So I'm just taking some of this green to see if it's the green that I want to use or not. It's a little, actually that looks pretty good. I'm going to just see what this darker one is. I like it. It's definitely different. It's like, I was saying at the beginning of the video, it's definitely gouache. So, you can see the word gouache on here. But then there's also the words tempera on it. And I can't tell if that's just like how you say gouache in another language, or if it's actually some kind of tempera gouache. So I'm trying to figure that out. I'm taking a workshop right now with Haney Saltani on what are they called? Pen Studio or Pen Art Studio or something. And she uses, I'm pretty sure she uses this exact gouache. We were trying to get her to post a photo of it so I can see if it actually had the word tempera on it. Because she was like, no, it just says gouache. So I am not totally sure. So I think I'm going to stick with this lighter green. I think that's going to give me the effect that I want. I wanted to keep the most of the portrait neutral and then really pop the hoodie around his face with this nice bright green here, which looks kind of viridian-ish, a little bit. So I'm going to take that and I'm going to darken it up for some of these shadow parts on the sweater. Yeah, it totally activates like normal gouache. I've never painted with tempera paint, so I don't know how that's supposed to act. Do you know if it's like, if am I saying that right? Tempera paint can it be reactivated with water like gouache can? I'm not sure about that. I think it's just like egg. It's something to do with egg, right? I should know more about this. I probably should have researched it a little more. So trying to get this cool kind of angular dark spot here on his hoodie. And then it does get, it's still really dark here, but it gets a little bit lighter on the curve. I have students use it all the time. I'm an art docent? I don't know what that means. What does that mean? Is that a typo? Or is that a word? Something to do with egg, LOL. But I haven't really used it myself. I'll have to bring some home today and mess with it. Oh yeah, for sure. I know, I should probably just Google, like, I think you can just make it. I've heard a lot of people talk about making it themselves. So I do wonder if there's some kind of ingredient in these that makes it more like a gouache tempera or something, because it acts very similarly. Like, it definitely, it's a gouache. But there is something slightly different about it, and I can't quite put my finger on what that is. And it might just, maybe it uses like a different binder, or I'm not sure. I'm gonna do some more research. I'm really enjoying it. I wish they had a cad red, and I wish they had a opera pink. That's the only thing that I'm kind of missing about my Winsor Newton. An art docent comes into the classroom and teaches about an artist and does an art project with the students. There's no art teacher at my kid's school. Oh, that's cool. Do you, like, is that your job, or is that something you do to volunteer so that the kids just like get some art exposure? Either way, that's awesome. That's funny. I've never heard that term before. So I feel like I'm painting so organized right now, and I think just because I'm with you guys, but normally I don't like stick to like one value range at a time. But now that I'm doing this, I'm realizing like I probably should do this more often, because I do think it helps keep the value structure a little more consistent, which is something I'm always, working on. So this is good that I'm doing this, because I think I should continue to do this even when I'm painting on my own. It's a volunteer position. That's so cool that you do that. I love it. Holly, I was talking earlier about brush sizes, like, so I think I mentioned it in the last live, like, I've just recently started kind of having a new appreciation for small brushes, and especially when it comes to portraits. I feel like for a while I was trying to figure out my groove with painting portraits with gouache, and I kept feeling like I just needed to like suck it up and go to oil. Like, I was like, okay, if you're going to be a portrait artist, I just was like, I think you just need to accept that oil is like the superior medium for portraits. And a part of me still kind of believes that. But I got inspired to try out painting with a really small brush by some artists online. And as soon as I did it, I was like, oh, this makes such a big difference. Because it helped me utilize the characteristic of gouache that lets you reactivate it with water. And it was so cool and fun. And I was like, oh, I think this is the way. This is the way. Do you watch The Mandalorian? Because I do. And I just came out and I couldn't watch it last night with my husband because he had plans. So I think we're going to try to watch it tonight. And also, are you obsessed with Pedro Pascal? Because I am, and I feel like the entire world is. Yes, Pedro. I've never seen somebody like look like they're having so much fun. Like every like meme that pops up about him or interview clip that I see of him, I'm just like, are you like how can you be so joyous? Or like how can it look like you're having so much fun all the time? He definitely has like a very infectious personality, it seems. We've also been obsessed with This Is Us. Where I don't know if you've watched that at all, but I'm really really enjoying it. Por supuesto. Okay, let's see. I really got to slow down, guys, because this is working for me, and I typically don't paint this slowly. And like I said, this organized. Like I don't know if the camera's picking up on it, but there's this really subtle value shift here in this shadow section of his hoodie that I just really like, and it's like that's what I was trying to go for. He was in a very weird space movie shot here in our forest in Washington. My friend was the art director or something. On Pedro's episode of Pedro's episode of SNL was incredible. I have only seen clips of it, but yeah, it looked like it was cool. He's just so lovable, you know. I saw some clips of him with Oscar Isaac, and I was just like, oh my god, Latino Hollywood is just blowing up right now. It's like such a moment for them. Okay, I think there's a little shadow spot there. Let's see. I'm gonna get these couple other darker green spots, and then I'm gonna start moving into the lighter values in his face. Yeah, it's been a long time coming. Latino heartthrobs. Yes, love it. Holly, did you already say what kind of gouache you use? Do you use like Winsor and Newton or I can't remember. Yeah, cool. So the one thing I noticed when I switched to these like smaller brushes is it started to feel a little bit like I was just like coloring, if that makes sense. And I was like, I don't know how I feel about that. I like the idea of painting kind of loose and not getting like um, too like precious about it. But I think I found that my way of combating that or balancing that out was trying to stay really loose in the underpainting and maybe even I could probably even spend a little more time on that, just so that I feel like I get that part of me that wants to just kind of throw paint in and get some really big interesting shapes, or like be more gestural. I thought that would be a good way to kind of feed that part of me that craves that, and then go in on top with these like smaller brushes. And so far that's been working pretty well. The I was inspired to try. I meant to say earlier, I was inspired to try the smaller brushes. There's a few artists on Instagram that I follow who I love, who do like amazing work, amazing portrait work with small brushes. And I wrote their names down here so I wouldn't forget. One of them is Ange Bell, or Ang Bell. I'm not exactly sure how to pronounce it, but her handle is Ang Bell Art, ANGE Bell Art, and she's just like she's like a master. I love every time she posts anything. I'm just like, oh my god. She painted my son last year, one of the references that I had posted, and it was just like unbelievable. So beautiful. She's really amazing at like kind of finding that balance that I was just talking about. Like she's got these really abstract portions of her pieces, and then some of the painting just looks so real, and like it feels like she's really balanced, like realism with abstraction, which I just think is so cool. Um, and then the other two artists were Nadine Tralala. I don't know if Nadine, if that's how I say your name. I don't know if you're watching today, but her handle is KOPFSCHEU. And she does amazing small brush work. I love it so much. Um, and then the other one is Ellie Kerr. What is it? Ellie Kerr Smiley. If you look at who I follow on Instagram and just put in like the beginnings of these names, they should pop up. And they're all just these like really phenomenal portrait artists who inspired me to try using a really small brush. So I credit them for that, because it's like definitely shifted around the way that I approach painting portraits now. Okay, so I think we've mostly got the majority of these shadow shapes in, and I'm going to go back in now and get some of these lighter values around his face. I'm debating if I should do the rest of his hoodie. Maybe I will do that actually. Just get some more hoodie done. Yeah, see, this is why I keep the jars of paint. I have to kind of line up in front of me, like right in front of this section, because otherwise I can't gauge how far in I get, and then I like get all this paint on my brush like that. So I'm just gonna wipe some of that off. And if you're just joining, feel free to say hi in the chat and let us know if you're painting or if you're just hanging out or if you have any questions. So I'm going to try to make his hoodie a little more saturated than it is in the reference, just because I want the portrait itself to be pretty neutral toned, and then I thought it would be cool if his hoodie really kind of popped in the painting and like was the most saturated part of it. So here I'm going to kind of just place in a darker value to suggest this little transition here. And then I'm going to go in with the damp brush and kind of blend it out like I was doing before. That's a little too wet. So yeah, like that. And I think that is actually what kind of messes up the brush most is when I'm doing that or trying to get like my little texture with like the rolling, but I don't know if you can tell here. The bristles on these little guys usually get pretty messed up, which is fine. You just kind of have to keep an eye on it because I've definitely gone from trying to blend or get texture with these brushes and then trying to get just like a smooth mark and forgetting that it's like all splayed. So I was saying last session, now that I'm done with the minis, I really want to focus on doing some urban sketching and incorporating more structures and architecture and like cars into my drawing and into my paintings, because that is definitely an area where I feel like I get pretty intimidated. And I just love buildings and I love art with buildings in them. And it feels like kind of like a limitation that I've put on myself that like, you know, I don't know how to do that, or I find that I kind of avoid it because it's uncomfortable and I don't feel comfortable doing it. So I am going to force myself to go toward the discomfort, and I don't know if I'm gonna come up with like a challenge per se. I might. I usually do well with challenges because, you know, it's easy to just slip back into your comfort zone. So sometimes if I tell myself like, okay, I'm gonna, like with the mini project, I was like, I'm gonna do 100 minis. I definitely did not think that was gonna take me an entire year, but it did. So I don't know if it's gonna be like a number challenge or if maybe I'll, um, maybe I just got a new sketchbook, so maybe I'll do like I have to fill up that sketchbook with drawings or paintings of buildings and cars, something like that. Um, but if you know or love any urban sketchers, if you could drop their names in the comments, that would be awesome because I'm kind of trying to compile some inspiration, um, and maybe even take some classes if I can. I mentioned him last time, but I took David Morales' class on Domestica, and that was really cool and very, very inspiring. Um, so if that gives you any indication of like the kind of urban sketching or you know, like pen and ink sketching I'm talking about, it would be he would be a good jumping point. But if you have any illustrators or, like I said, urban sketchers, especially those who do like plein air urban sketching, I would love to look them up. So let me know. Do you want me to link them directly on Instagram or drop them here? Maybe drop them here so that if other people are interested, they can also see it. Um, that might be cool. Thanks, Holly. Okay, cool. I like the vibrancy of the hoodie compared to his face so far. I mean, I still have a lot of work to do on his face, but I like that contrast there. I also really like this about small brushes, which definitely messes up the bristles, but just kind of like roughly blocking in color with them, I feel like it creates a really cool texture that I can't get from the bigger flat brushes that I was using, primarily only using for a pretty long time with my gouache work. But like if you just like, you know, kind of brush it in, you can get some really cool like texture and like dry brushy stuff. And then lots of time I find that when I do that, I often just kind of want to keep it a little more rough. Like I like when these little bits of the underpainting peek through. I think that looks really cool. Okay. Coming together. Let's see. I might put a little bit of this lighter. Oh, cool. Everyday Liz MC. Nice. I'll have to check her out. Okay, I think that's the most of the hoodie that I want to do for now. And then let's go back in and get some of these lighter values on the face. Let's see. So I'm just mixing some white with some yellow ochre and some vermilion. So definitely lighter than most of these colors, as you can see, but when we put this on the page, it's actually going to darken up quite a bit. So I'm going to just try to use this tone as kind of the transition from these darker colors. And then this is a good time to kind of carve out some of the shapes again. Like, looks like I let his eyebrow get a little bit too wide here. I do really like I like shifting between landscapes and portraits because I feel like portraits make me really kind of focus in a way that landscapes, I don't know, like there's no, it's easier to get, I think it's easier to get a little more interpretive with landscapes. And where with portraits, you're trying to kind of render someone, so there's like a little more pressure to get it correct, which sometimes can feel stressful, but I find that when I've been doing a lot of landscapes or like a lot of, especially like abstract landscapes, that I appreciate coming back to portraits for like a little bit more structure, at least this way of painting them. I do love like really abstract portraits too, but I feel like it's harder to do that with gouache. I think gouache really shines when you don't have like a ton of layers. And so here I'm just lightening up this pile that I already had on the palette that had dried up. Get some of this pink. So now I'm just jumping around and trying to see where I can place some of these lighter tones. These aren't the super lightest tones, but they're not, I don't know if I'd call them mid-tones either. They're a bit lighter. Maybe they're mid-tones. Let's see. Okay, and then I'm going to take some of this vermilion, which is really nice for portraits because it's got that, it's such a funny color actually, because like when you put it straight from the jar, it looks pretty orange, and then when you lighten it up, it gets kind of pinky or corally, which makes sense, but it almost feels like it has, I don't know, like some hidden undertones or something. It always like surprises me when I lighten it up. I feel like it changes a lot. Okay, and I'm gonna get some of this red. happening? I love when I start to see like all the shapes form. Okay, let's get some. So one of the things that I'm trying to remember to do is get some more color in each value section. So, the more you paint, if you painted for a while, the more color I think you train your eye to be able to see. So, portraits are a really good time for me anyway to practice this because I think there's so much color variation within a face, and it's easy to just be like, you can squint or you can kind of like generalize an area with a color. But I think what then makes it more interesting is if you can go in and add in very subtle color shifts within the value sections. And that is what I'm trying to practice. So, let's see, like under his eye, looks pretty yellow to me. And then it gets cooler. The lower it gets. So this took me a little while to even to logically understand, and now it's still something that I am trying to apply into my actual painting. But like every time I add a color to a color pile, I have to shift the value again to make sure that I'm staying in the value group that I want to be in, if that makes sense. Holly, I don't know if that's if you're kind of at that point of learning with your painting, but that was like a kind of big, I don't know, like paradigm shift for me, or like it was just a big shift in my learning when I was like, oh yeah, like if I add ultramarine blue to this value pile that's supposed to be my highlight, it's going to significantly darken the color and change the value. So I have to be extra careful with like how much I'm putting in, and then with the decisions of like how I'm gonna either lighten it up or darken it up, or in that case lighten it up to maintain the value that I'm trying to achieve. I don't know if that made any sense to you, but that was just like a very helpful part of my learning process. Yeah, this is definitely one of the ways that this paint acts differently to me than like the tube Winsor Newton is it feels like you can paint really thick with it and it kind of maintains its shape. So it feels like you can get some cool like what is that called? Like impasto texture with this gouache over the other gouache that I've used previously, um, like Winsor Newton or Holbein or M. Graham. I wonder what that is. I wonder if I can like see like that's too much, but I could see how that could be like a cool effect that you can create with this. I should try to do like a super textured painting with this and then see how it dries. Yeah. Then one of the other things that I try to remember to do, which I don't always remember, is if I'm painting a portrait, I try to let the brushstroke that I create kind of follow the shape of the head. So, like if I was going to paint, this curve, I would try to paint it like in a curve. I would try to maintain that gesture to like imply the curvature of the shape that I'm creating. It's interesting to have like this ochre yellow underpainting on his skin. I'm not sure how I feel about it. It's like, excuse me. It's I don't know. I kind of like it, but it's a little strange. Thanks, Ollie. It is welcome. Holly, where in Washington are you? Everett. A city with a bad reputation, but I live in a 1907 Victorian house 5 minutes from the beach. Oh my god. That sounds lovely. I do miss the ocean sometimes, being landlocked here in Colorado. I was never one, like, the ocean kind of scares me. So, like, I don't really necessarily want to go swimming in it, but I really like looking at it and hearing it and smelling it and being near it. Um, that I enjoy. Why does Everett have a bad reputation? I don't think I've ever heard about it. Is it known for like being dangerous or? Okay, so to suggest this like facial hair here, I'm using uh, this pile I already had of this kind of grayish purple. Hits a sound, so there are no big waves. We have seals and whales, though. My kids swim in the ocean year round, which gets tricky in the winter. It's always, I'm just going to dip my toes in, Mama. That's sweet. So I'm just going to do a bit of dry brushing here, get some of that texture. Oh yeah, and then while I've got this pretty kind of gray down purple, I think this might be a good, yeah, I think that's a good color match for that section there of the top of his t-shirt, and I'm just going to lighten the value up. We are the best place with services for houseless people and people struggling with addiction, so we attract those populations. It can be tricky, but I'm glad we have services that can help. Oh, that's cool. That's super cool. Yeah, Colorado still has a lot of work to do in that area. I feel like, I mean, I think there are some resources in Denver, but where we are in Boulder, it's like I don't think there are that many resources, and I just feel like Boulder is known to be kind of wealthy, and you know, there's not a lot of what's the word, acceptance or interest in allowing houseless people to like set up encampments or um, which to some extent I understand in some areas, but I'm like, okay, well, if we're going to kick them out of the bike path, then we probably need to give them more of an option of like where to go. So yeah, that's definitely an issue here. Okay, that feels nice there. I like the way that value shift there is like creating the shadow underneath his or around his neck. It's quite a bit lighter than the reference. Like this section should be a lot darker, but I kind of like it. Like when I'm looking at it on the screen right now, I feel like that reads nicely. So I might just leave it. Might not mess with it. That's a little too wet. I want to get a little more texture than that. So far, so good. This portrait is not giving me a ton of grief, which is nice. Sometimes they do. Sometimes I was thinking, I'm like, there are portraits that I literally just like crumple up and throw in the garbage because I'm like, ugh, can't get it. And I was like, how's that going to work if I would do that on a live? I was actually thinking about that last night. I was like, I wonder if I'll have to crumple anything up and like start over. But it's probably good to force me not to do that actually, because I do think everything is salvageable to some extent. And I think sometimes I do. I tend to not do that as much anymore, but I used to do that a lot when I was first starting to paint. I would just be like, fuck this, moving on to the next one, and just like throw a lot of stuff away. I think sketchbooking helps with that because it's kind of all there and you have to just like work with what you got and accept it for what it is. And so I feel like that's made me better at doing it when I'm not, when I'm just painting in general, not just for a sketchbook. So I'm trying to decide if I want to darken the background up at all. In the reference, especially right here, it's pretty dark. Really on this whole side of his face, on this whole side of the reference, it's pretty dark. So it might be cool to kind of make it pop, but I don't know. Sometimes I think it's cool to just let these like splatters create the contrast too. So I'll see. I might just save that for the end. I do try to get background colors in. Like I try not to save them for the end per se because lots of times once I put a background color in, it will shift my perception of the colors that are in the portrait. And oftentimes there's places that you can put that background color in the portrait, which can be cool. So I'm gonna see these like daytime live sessions work best for me because I have kids. So this is like when they're at school. But I am gonna try to do maybe like an evening one or like a weekend one maybe for people who work, 9 to 5 or um, who can't maybe make it to these and want to. If you're watching this on the replay and you would prefer like an out, like not business hour time for these lives, just let me know and I can try to figure that out. Okay, it's Camilo. At this point, it is Camilo. We are here with Camilo, which is cool. Definitely still need to do some tweaking. Yeah, I guess I like how the yellow underpainting kind of shifted the colors that I put on top of it, but I am also a big fan of letting the underpainting peek through in places, and I'm not sure that I want to let this yellow peek through because it kind of, I don't know, it reminds me, it like makes him look a little sick or something to me. Like there's something about that shade of yellow. It's like this pale, I don't know. There's something about this yellow that I'm not crazy about to leave poking through. So let's keep going. So again, I'm trying to keep in mind the shape of this head. You know, there's a curve here, so I am trying to paint on that curve to kind of help that perception there. That's, yeah. I just made this one little mark here, and I feel like that helped a lot. let's find a few spots in his facial hair that is darker. Get some variation in here. So the bits that are kind of coming away from his skin here definitely seem like the darkest spots. And they kind of frame the shape of his face. And I want to get a little more dry brushy with that, so I'm gonna okay, I want to make sure that I don't over paint this, and I can definitely see that I'm getting to the point in the painting where I could do that. So I'm gonna try to just like block in any missing spots and then decide which spots need more tweaking and then which spots I can leave a little bit more unfinished so that there's a little balance of that. I feel like the paintings that always kind of like stop me in my tracks, I've noticed, are the paintings that have at least partial, if not like completely unfinished qualities to it. And I don't know exactly why that is, but I just love that look. And, you know, there's probably like a corny metaphor in there somewhere. skin has gotten pretty pink, which is fine. That's kind of what I was going for, but I want to make sure that I break it up a little bit. So I'm going to see what other color we can get in here. Oh, thanks, Holly. Are you a part of the Canyo reference group, Holly? Do you know about that? So I'm just putting a little bit of, I made kind of like a green, like a muted green light value here, and just seeing where I can put that in. So it's on Telegram, I believe. Wait, is that right? Yeah. And it's just a group of artists who share references of themselves for other artists to paint. And it's cool. It's like people all over the world, and it's a cool little community. I need to check out that drawing, that live drawing thing that you mentioned last week. I think that night I actually ended up going to bed at like a relatively reasonable time. So I missed the 1 a.m. one, and I was thinking that I would try to catch the 9 a.m. one, or the morning one, and I like totally blanked it. It's called Canyo, Caneyo. If you look on my Instagram, or look, I think I'm pretty sure I follow them online. They have an Instagram account. Yes, exactly. Do you go to it every week? So because his hoodie is green, I thought the kind of that it would be cool if some of these colored, these sections where I'm kind of pulling or exaggerating some of the hues that I'm seeing in the reference were also in that green family. And I do want to lighten this up a teeny bit. That's cool. Yeah, I want to do that. There's some live drawings in my area too. I've gone to them a few times, but they're in the evenings usually, which should be good for my schedule, but I feel like the evenings are always just flying by. But I do want to prioritize going to some live drawing sessions because, like I was saying, I really want to get better at drawing this year, and I feel like that's one of the better ways to practice, to draw from life and have like time restraints and stuff. All right, we are getting there. We're getting there. We're getting there. What do you think? Should I darken up the background at all? Maybe I can just do like a section to kind of bring the shape of his ear out and then leave. There are some cool like lights that are blurred into little bokeh balls behind him, which actually I wasn't planning on these little ochre splatters to signify, but I think they kind of do. I'm gonna do, let's see, I think I'm just gonna do a little bit. I think you'd love it because you're often talking about how you like unfinished work and the poses are like 3 minutes long, so everything will have that quality. Yes. Cool. I know, that's why I think I like figure drawing. Figure drawing was like one of my favorite classes in college. Like I think I took it more than any other art class because I just loved it. I'll use a different brush for that. Do they do long poses ever, or is it just short pose? Oh, okay, cool. So short poses. That'll be good. Good practice. All right, let's see if I can figure out how to like end this darker bit here because I want to still keep some of these splatter marks, but I think I might actually, yeah, I think I want to bring it up a little bit to kind of shape his head and get rid of this drawing here. I think that was a little bit too much of a curve. Uh-oh, we might have to sacrifice the splatter marks on that side. We can bring them back, actually. Maybe we'll do that. going for it, I guess. I mean, I actually really like how the dark is making his skin pop. So I'm not mad. I'm not mad about this. I don't know if I need to bring it all the way around. It might be cool if it just kind of textures off here. Let's see. Okay, let's see. Actually, there's some variation here, so I might kind of lighten up a bit as we come around. Yep, these splatters might just be little secrets. We'll see, we might be able to bring some of it back. Okay, let's do some blending. Okay, cool. I think I like that. Let's see if we can bring a little bit of splatter back. I wonder if maybe we should actually do some green this time instead of the yellow. Might pop a little more on the black. And I don't want it to be too intense. And I also want to try to avoid getting it on his skin too much. But if it does get on his skin, we can just kind of blend it. This is another way to do that splatter effect. Instead of like bristling it out, you can just like hit it with another brush. Oops. Yeah, we're getting it on his skin a little bit. Let's see. like that. I might do a little bit more. So it definitely got on his skin, but I kind of like it. I'm gonna try to incorporate like if I had some blue, some saturated blue on my palette, I would have done some blue on this side because I can see a lot of blue in the reference. But since I don't, since I'm just using the neutral black as my blue, I'm going to see how it looks to do that same value but with green. And I think I like it. Yeah, that looks cool. I might darken that up a teeny bit there, just so it doesn't break up this too much. Yeah, I like that. Okay, cool. And then I'm going to just go through and kind of buff out any of the splatters that feel distracting. So like this big one here is a little distracting. This is kind of a cool way to get some accent color into your skin tones, I guess. It's pretty subtle, but it's cool. I like it. Because the marks are so small, they're not really affecting the value of the section, but they are creating a little bit of a very subtle kind of color shift. So kind of, I think I like the splatters over here on the side of his face. Kind of just feels like it's giving it some texture. There is one pretty big one. I don't know if you can see it on the camera, but right here. Okay. So at this point, I'm just going to step back and see if there's any kind of glaring spots that seem to be annoying me or distracting me or kind of taking me out of the experience of looking at it. Like this spot here. Let's see. So I'm just going to go back and forth. So I see he's got like a nice dip here in the shape of his skull, or his head here, so I'm going to bring that out a little more. squinting, looking back and forth. I think this top section here needs to be a little darker. Just right in here. I think it was darker and then I lightened it up. But let's just throw in a little bit of purple, a little gray purple here. Somewhere else I could use that. Looks good. I'm just going to try to blend that transition a little more. Okay. Okay, that looks a little too bold. So I'm going to buff that out a teeny bit. Cool. So I'm just putting kind of just the finishing touches, just squinting a lot, looking back and forth between the reference and the painting and seeing what spots need a little more, and kind of deciding like, okay, which spots am I going to leave unfinished because they feel like they have enough information to kind of suggest what I'm going for. I do want this spot to be bolder. Okay, I think we're getting there. I think we're getting close. This spot here, I think, needs to be a little darker. Yeah, that made a big difference, I think. Okay, I think it's done. I think so. I think it's done. Yay, good timing. Thanks, Holly. Thanks for hanging out. This is like the Holly and Rebecca live. I will see you next time. Oops. I kind of like this pink. I might add this in a few spots. Let's see. Yeah, I think that looks nice with the green. Just kind of popping it. Okay. A couple spots with the pink, and then I'm going to seriously be done. Ooh, I like the pink. Okay, don't overdo it. Don't overdo it. Okay. I think we're good. I think I'm done. Okay. Last look. Okay, wait, I do see one thing. I think this eye here is coming down a little bit too low. So I just want to bring it up a little bit. Oh my god, it's so hard to stop. Okay, I'm done. I'm forcing myself to stop. Okay, thanks for watching, and I will be back next week, probably Wednesday or Thursday. I'm not sure what day yet. If you want to be alerted when I go live, check out my Instagram. It's written right, where am I? This way. Rebecca Caridad Art, and I usually post the references and a little heads up about when I'm going to be going live and what reference, what we'll be painting. This time we voted on between a portrait and a landscape, and portrait won. So next week I'll be asking you guys again probably what we should paint. And yeah, if you're watching this on the replay, thanks so much, and I will see you next week.